Good morning and welcome to our third instalment in the DTX Talks series. Today we're going to be discussing unlocking customer value by quickly transforming into a digital business. My name's Harry Chapman and I'm the Content Director for Digital Transformation Expo. I'm very pleased to be joined here by Phil Scully. Phil is CIO at Costa Coffee. Morning, Phil. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Phil, you'll be pleased to know that in preparation for this morning's chat, I did go out and buy a Costa Coffee to give me some energy.
Get your reusables in there.
Yeah, you're more environmentally conscious than I am. Phil, I think the past few months have been pretty interesting for Costa in terms of the challenges of rapidly closing to rapidly opening, haven't they?
Yeah, hugely challenging. Just in the UK alone, 2,500 stores and nearly 10,000 machines, and then we've got business in China, across Europe and the Middle East. So different countries, different territories, but very similar challenges over the last few months.
Yeah, it's really quite interesting, and I can't wait for you to tell us more. So I'll hand over to you now for the 15 minutes of remarks on the topic this morning. If you're listening in, please kind of be aware that we're doing Q&A. That will come after the session. So do just post your questions as we go through in the Q&A box at the bottom, and we'll get to those later. So Phil, over to you.
Thank you, Harry. So good morning. I'm Phil Scully, as Harry said. I'm the Group CIO for Costa Coffee. I've been there for the last 3 years. We've got over 4,000 stores globally and over 10,000 coffee machines with Coffee Express globally, plus an FMCG business selling beans, pods through supermarket and other channels. But thank you all for taking the time to join me discussing unlocking customer value and quickly transforming into a digital business. And as I said, I've been CIO for 3.5 years, and it's been a really interesting 3.5 years. But the first 3 years have probably been less interesting than the last 6 months. And when you consider that first 3 years included starting the digital transformation journey, stopping the digital transformation journey sort of halfway because of the acquisition of Costa by Coca-Cola, and then the separation from Whitbread. It kind of highlights just how interesting the last 6 months has actually been. And I think it's been an interesting 6 months just because of general chaos that's resulted in just a massive amount of change and adaptability. Whether you say at a country level, at a currency level, at a commodity level, or at a consumer level, those C-suite topics have all been in a massive state of flux and have really forced an agenda of rethinking, I think, what digital transformation means to business, and probably highlighting some of the gaps in either understanding or execution of digital transformation. Because if you look at where we've got to, just since March, cash transactions in the UK are down over 40%. The grocery online business, just Ocado's numbers in the last couple of days, grocery online has gone up 27% since March, like for like. And that's kind of multi-years growth in 6 months. Disney Plus has taken on over 50 million subscribers since lockdown in March to basically in 5 months, 10 million new subscribers a month on average, and blown every single year target they had clear out of the water. And just last night I was reading that US online sales in June, like for like, have gone up 76% year on year. Numbers are unprecedented. The drift from physical to digital has not just been turbocharged, is an understatement, gone into warp speed, and companies have got to respond. And I think this is where digital transformation really is getting a huge accelerator and kicked, because these are all linked. The persistent disruption that every organization, every business, every individual is now facing And that level of uncertainty is driving change. Any plan, any strategy has got to be ready to pivot and change. And there's a great quote from Charles de Gaulle. I'm probably about to butcher it, but strategy is nothing. You have to be quick and nimble on your feet to execute. And I think that's very, very true. I think what we're seeing now is whatever plan we had at the beginning of the year is fundamentally somewhat different now. But the big differentiator for me is pace of execution. Executing at quality and meeting a very demanding consumer experience expectation now is, and always has been, part of the agenda. We've now added pace to that. How do we execute that agenda at an accelerated pace? And I think the organizations that can do that at pace will be the ones who are more successful than the slower organizations. And this is where digital transformation, I think, has to meet the agenda head on. And it's not just, for me, about having a website or having social media channels available and managed. Digital transformation is about the side-to-side and the end-to-end of your organization. It has to consider your partners in a supply chain and a value chain. It has to look outside the organization and make sure that that is as automated and as digitized as the consumer journeys have been focused on and digitized over the last few years. There have been a number of businesses I've spoken to where step one is register the customer. Step two is send them a large printed document to sign. In a post-coronavirus, in a lockdown world, some of that agenda has to change. That has not been digitally transformed. If you're still relying on swivel chair integration in your business, most organizations have worked that way really successfully because you've had a head office complex with 1,000 people who can do that. You've now got 1,000 offices. Swivel chair integration across 1,000 offices that are separated is somewhat harder to achieve. And it's not just about, therefore, that technology. It's about that cultural shift of looking at these processes, looking at this way of working and saying, what needs to happen to shift the culture, to shift the behavior, to shift the process? And how can our technology deliveries support that going forward? That's a huge agenda. So where do you start? And I think you have to think about not boiling the ocean. You can't take it all on. You have to pick your processes, your user journeys, your high value areas of either consumer or supply, and execute at pace. Build that momentum. Because if you start your digital transformation with a 3-year ERP refresh or a 5-year supply chain renovation, it's not going to work. You're going to have to execute faster than that. You have to think about smaller chunks. You have to think about what skills and governance you need to execute at that pace. You have to think about what project methodology you're using. So digital transformation is not just about the technology. It's about the people, the processes, the skills, and the culture of your organization shifting at pace and using the first few phases of that to build momentum, create the agenda, and set the example for the future phases and the rest of the business. Because every business has a group function of no, the department of we've always done it this way. Those days are probably gone. We have to think about not what we can't do and why we shouldn't do it. It's what we can do and why we should. And that has to start at a cultural level, not just a technology level. So if you're going to move at pace, if you're going to execute at pace in a digital transformation agenda, what do you need to do? How do you break it down and not boil the ocean? Well, for me, you have to look at what's been slowing you down. What traditionally takes a lead time in a project? What traditionally consumes all of your contingency, all of your time? When you think about the legacy way of working pre-lockdown, of working in treacle, what was that? And how do you change it? So for me, think about data, think about master data. You can never start cleaning your data quickly enough in a program of work. Do you need all of that data? Do you need all of that history and all of that archive? How do you stop carrying that anchor and start afresh if that's what you can do? Because that will give you a massive amount of pace. And at Costa, we've done that. We've looked at what we can do with some of those historical data sets. Do we need to migrate them? Can we cleanse them earlier? How do we live with them? How does that work as an accelerator? Because if you get the data right, the next acceleration is integration. How can you connect your systems and your processes faster? Remove the swivel chair. Get rid of some of that legacy paper handoffs and actually execute at pace. And if you can execute integration at pace, can you reuse? So we're not the finished article, but we've managed to get over 60% reuse on our APIs now in Costa. That gives pace. That basically provides an accelerator for that reuse if you can get there. And it's really worth thinking about. And if you've got both of those, data and integration, working, you can start migrating faster with more surety and less stops in your migration paths. Those three things alone, for me, have been the tail of a number of projects I've been involved with over 30 years. And it's been a tale that I've been working hard with the IT team at Costa to try and remove. And like I say, you never get to that perfect answer, but you can make progress, and progress gives you pace. Other things of interest for me that slow everybody down, and some of that is culture, is customization. Do you really need to customize? There's a lot of talk about moving to the cloud. We've moved to the cloud in Costa. We've successfully executed a cloud strategy, and we can move faster because we are a cloud-based organization. And that's hugely important. But it can still be slowed down if you've got a culture of customization. So what can you take out of the box? How can you take a standard implementation and fit it rather than a customized implementation? Because 9 times out of 10, that customized implementation will effectively be a slower delivery than the out-of-the-box service. And then last but not least, I think for me, the interesting thing over the last 15 weeks of isolation and coming out of lockdown is the adaptability of people to learn new technology and ways of working. I don't know how many I've used. I mean, I've used Teams, Skype, WebEx, GoToMeeting, Zoom. I'm even familiar with Discord because of my teenagers now. These things people have picked up, they've learned. Can we take that back to some of our digital transformation and shift the culture with a minimal training set, with a more focused training set, with better online tools for self-learning? Because nobody's been taught Disney Plus. Nobody's been trained in Zoom or how to shop Amazon. We're all doing it. And the growth suggests we're going to keep doing it, and the habits are there and people have learned how to do it. How can we as organizations take that culture of adaptability, back into our digital transformations, because some of those training phases can really slow down some of the execution. And again, I'm not saying that training isn't important. I'm saying look at it differently, looking for progress, not perfection. And if you get that progress right, you actually have the pace of digital transformation, regardless of whatever area of your organization you are looking at. In terms of cloud platforms, I just can't stress enough. I think there's been a number of articles I've read, there's a number of examples. Legacy systems, legacy data centers, in-house legacy data centers particularly, have been shown as slowing down some of this digital transformation, have been shown as slowing down some of that ability to execute. So moving to the cloud, looking at what you can get to cloud platforms quickly, early, would be a significant accelerator to digital transformation. But you have to have the wrappers around it. You have to think about the partners you're picking and the way you are managing that, whether that's internal or external resource, partner resource, and how you are delivering change into that. Because if you've got the wrong mix of partner and platform, it will still be a slower delivery than you could possibly execute. And again, if you have a look at that pace of execution, then the partnerships and the platforms you select to transform the culture of your organization are clearly going to be hugely important, because they are the things that create the foundations that you live with. The data, the integration, the ways of working, effectively, they're the oil. They're the things that speed you along. They're the things that improve the pace that you can execute at. But without those correct building blocks, without that legacy move to cloud, without some of those difficult partner conversations about how to deliver at pace, how to change the governance from being monthly or quarterly to weekly, it will still be a slower pace of execution. I'm going to leave it there. I hope some of that was helpful. I think I will open it up for questions and look to Harry to help me out with that.
Thanks, Phil. I mean, I think it's really interesting, particularly what you said around the people and culture piece. We've seen that coming up in all of our surveys recently with industry professionals. And I think particularly during the COVID piece we've seen over the 4 months, it's become even more important for IT professionals getting the people and culture element right of digital transformation. Just staying on that at the moment, you talked about that quote, I think it was from Charles de Gaulle, being nimble on your feet. We have one question coming through on that. What are your top tips for pivoting or being nimble from your experience of the past 4 months? Perhaps one or two of your best pieces of advice.
So I think two for me, definitely is look what you've got and how can you scale it or adapt, rather than starting with something new. What have you got that you can scale or change? And I think that would be or reuse. I think that creates a technology accelerator that is hugely useful. And I think the other thing for me is don't get tied up with the budget. The moment you start talking about need new budget or it's going to cost a bit more, there's a group department of no somewhere in your organization that will say,
we all know what those are.
They'll say no, and it's not always the ones that you think it might be. So you have to think about, right, if I've got a budget, what can I do within that I don't have to go back and ask for more. I don't have to go ask for new. I can go and do something within what I've got and make that pivot. Because, you know, a pivot is exactly that. It's taking what you've got and swinging it left or swinging it right. And that's the kind of mentality you have to apply to your technology estate or the work that you've got.
We had another question from Gareth Whiteley on that same subject that kind of moves it on, which I thought was quite good. How how do you think organization size affects the ability to execute execute digital transformation? He said he assumes Coca-Cola have their own digital transformation agenda. How do you align that with Costa's transformation, and does that ever slow things down for Costa, or does it indeed speed it up?
I think every organisation's got a digital transformation agenda, and I think I said, you know, some of them have now been shown to have gaps. Coca-Cola are a fantastic global organisation and business, but they don't have high street stores. My role has got 2,500 high street stores to think about in the UK, and so the pace of execution on that estate is Costa's, and it's you know, of course we talk to Coca-Cola and look at what we can use as the best of what they have, but we have a very different business from Coca-Cola. I think size of an organization is probably, for me, less important than the mindset of the organization and the heritage of the organization. You can't hold up a high street retailer to Uber. Uber doesn't have any assets. They don't have any physical locations. They don't have any thousands of staff to train or thousands of tills to deploy new software to. The challenge is the mindset of the organization and how you reach those physical assets that a lot of organizations, whether they're a high street bank, high street retailer, large logistics organization, you have to think about how you get digital transformation to the physical endpoints, not just deploy it, but hold it there. Make it live, breathe, work, operate at that endpoint, that physical endpoint, relentlessly, brilliantly, at quality. And if you can't do that, you're going to struggle with that digital transformation agenda. I do apologize, coffee machine. You might expect.
On brand. I mean, you talked about breaking it down into smaller chunks as well, and using data, and we've had a couple of questions coming through from Paul Stringfellow and Phil Moore on data. And Paul asked, how important do you believe the building of a data strategy is to digitally transforming a business such as Costa? And Phil added to that to ask, he said he's quite interested in your comments about data cleansing and what your approach was to that, what you did and you didn't do.
So take the first one. Data is hugely important. Data strategy is massively important, and I think, you know, if you give away your data, if you give away your master data, you're giving away some of your intellectual property, because what you've got is what you've got, and that sale price, that promotion, that product information, those product attributes, that consumer information, everything you read is about data being the next oil. Well, kind of fundamentally you have a slight edge to that. I don't quite agree with it, because oil doesn't increase in value the more you have. The value stays the same. Your value is because you've got more oil. Data is being proven as the more data that you have, the value increases exponentially. Okay, so that for me makes data slightly different as a proposition from oil. And if you start giving it away, if you don't know it, if you don't own it, if you don't trust it, fundamentally, you could say the same thing about your digital transformation, that you don't own it, you don't know it, you don't trust it. So for me, you have to get data right, whether that's sales data, consumer data, site data, product data. It has to be yours, owned and understood. In terms of the other one, in terms of data cleanse, for me, keep it simple. Start early. Work with experts in the business who've been living with that data for years. You will find most legacy systems have got free text fields and things like that. You have to think about what to do with some of this legacy information. Do you have to keep it? What are the regulations around keeping it? You know, if you don't have some of those regulations, can you just migrate 1 year, 2 years, rather than 10 years or 12 years? You know, the number of times I've heard of, well, we need all of this information. When's the last time you used it? well, we haven't used it. It's not really valid for what we're doing now, because the data relates to when we didn't have a mobile sales channel and we didn't have a website. So do we really challenge, do we need to keep it all? Do we need to cleanse it all? Because ultimately, the more you keep and the more you have to cleanse, the more treacle you're introducing and the slower you're going to go.
Yeah, it's good, and it's good to hear that. I mean, moving on from the data element, I think you brought up execution pace as well, and you talked about pace of execution, obviously, which ties into data as well. But do you think, I guess, in the future, that execution at pace is dependent upon taking automation to the next level, using things like machine learning and data science as core building blocks to respond faster to customer expectations and demands? And this is a question from Anvi Ramsamy.
I do think that digital transformation, when you start connecting either your website back into your ERP or your supply chain out to your partners, it will increasingly become more and more automated, whether that's integrating with machines to provide automation, whether that's integrating with RPA to move processes away from traditional manned swivel chair to an automated process engine. Those technologies, I think, will start really coming through in a transformation agenda, whether you call that digital transformation or automation transformation in the future, although there's too many shins in that one. I see that as the general way forward. But then if you overlay things like machine learning and AI, they don't work so well with swivel chair. They don't work so well if the handshake is a paper-based contract that's signed by a consumer to be sent by traditional post back into an organization in a brown envelope. There has to be a level of where to apply some of those technologies, because if you haven't got it automated front to back, you're going to have gaps in the execution for some of those other technologies that organizations are looking at, whether that's AI or machine learning or anything else.
And finally, I guess, because we've probably got time, just to squeeze in one last question. We were talking about this before we came on, adaptability of people working in different environments. And we had a question from Charlotte Starkman saying that COVID-19 has broken a number of norms of how we work. You talked about how people have learned to use Zoom, etc., without training. What other norms do you think have changed that we can use to our advantage to speed up the execution of digital transformation?
I think people are just more accepting of change and more adaptable to it. And I think how we harness that to create new agendas, I think is going to be hugely important. If I knew what the future was, I wouldn't be sitting in front of you lot, right? So I just think that change and adaptability are going to become ways of life. It's probably called COVID-19 for a reason, because there were 18 before it. And if you're not talking about SARS or MERS, you're talking about COVID, which would suggest that there's probably something else around the corner, whether that's climate, whether that's pandemic, whether that's consumer behavior, some big, some small, some controllable, some not. Everything will result in a change somewhere, somehow, to people's behaviors, people's expectations, and the things that we have to do. So the ability to make progress, to pivot, to be adaptable, and to execute at pace in the front of that change agenda is, like I say, for me, that's the differentiators.
Yeah, and I agree. I think, as you said, whether it's pandemics or climate, more business shocks might be down the road, or there might be more things coming along. Obviously, we've seen the Apple iPhone and the internet changing the way that people work and over the past 20 years, but I think there's other things to come down the track.
You can look anywhere. I mean, I don't know anybody who's tried to get to a doctor's surgery.
No.
Like the Livy app is awesome. The whole interaction with GPs has fundamentally shifted in the last 100 days. People's interaction with the high street has shifted in the last 100 days. The 3 local stores, garden centres type thing near me that weren't doing click and collect before the pandemic, well, they're doing it now. And admittedly, they've carved up their car park with straw bales and pallets to create loading bays. Selco have done the same up the road. These organisations that didn't have this disruption, that were doing things the same way they've always done it, have in less than 100 days fundamentally shifted their consumer proposition and how they sell. That's just, for me, that's the way of the future. I don't see how it goes back to anything we thought was normal before COVID-19.
We've certainly jumped 4 or 5 years ahead, and I think someone said to me the other day, which put it quite nicely, the argument for digital transformation has been won. So there's no question around that. We've reached the end of our time, Phil, so I just wanted to say thank you for being here with us today, and thanks to all of our audience. We've had lots of questions. I'm afraid we haven't managed to answer all of them, but hopefully we've grouped some of those together and answer the big questions on your mind. We've kind of scratched the surface with this topic, so please do join us at the Digital Transformation Expo on the 30th of September, 1st of October, where we're going to be going into more detail on this. We also do have our next DTX talk coming up on the 4th of August with Ismail Amla. Ismail's Chief Growth Officer at Capita, and he's going to be looking specifically at the office and the workplace of the future. So do join us for that on the 4th of August. Phil, thanks for your time. Ladies and gents, we'll have a live recording of this available afterwards, and hope to see you all soon. Goodbye, everyone. Bye, Phil.
Cheers.